Hello, this is Psychologist Yulia Latunenko with you. And today we're going to talk about people who are in relationships with narcissists. The topic is specifically about how to break free from the clutches of a narcissist. If you haven't already subscribed to my channel yet, please do so and kindly give this video a thumbs up and a like. Don't forget about this because it really helps promote my channel on YouTube, and of course leave your comments because any activity from you is very important. So how do you break free from the clutches of a narcissist? I think this video will be interesting for both women and men who have found themselves in long-term relationships with a narcissist. And if you feel that your relationship with a narcissistic person feels like a swamp in which you are drowning and can't escape, then this video is for you. Sometimes people get stuck in relationships with narcissistic partners for years, even decades, losing their health and all the resources they had before they met this person. This happens precisely because partners of narcissists are often codependent individuals. Let me briefly remind you what codependency is. It's about unresolved developmental tasks. In other words, these are tasks that a child usually resolves during adolescence, separating themselves from their parents. Codependency is when childhood traumas occurred during the process of development. During your entire developmental process, you were unfortunately unable to become a fully mature and completely developed adult. I mean, psychologically mature adults, and what we often see is that people in adult bodies very frequently remain teenagers or even children who are 5 or 7 years old. A person's biological age can differ greatly from their psychological age. If in childhood this child suffered from their parents, whether it was neglect, cruelty, or even complete indifference, that also affects the child's psyche. In other words, the child was not cared for, not developed, not treated as an individual. And such a child later grows up to be codependent, because we are born completely dependent on our parents from the very beginning. And in the process of our development, we need to separate love from dependence, to understand that love is not the same as dependence. So when an immature person, a codependent person, enters into a relationship, they regress to a childlike stage where for them love means merging with the mother. A person in the throes of romantic infatuation feels same as a child feeding at mother's breast. All the same hormones, all the same sensations, euphoria, joy, the feeling that you're in paradise. And in this state, it's very hard to notice any real signs of a person's toxicity. And on top of that, a narcissist usually doesn't show their dark side at the beginning of a relationship. On the contrary, they try to create the illusion of paradise. They create a shared fantasy where the victim believes that in the future, this will be their perfect partner, the one who will make them happy, who will become the real father or real mother they unfortunately never had. I mean, they weren't there for you psychologically. They may have been there in name, but they themselves had childhood traumas and couldn't become fully fledged, psychologically mature parents for you. That's why a narcissist comes into the life of such a person, and the first thing they offer to this person is to become a father or mother. They actually create this illusion that finally a wonderful, good mother or father has come into your life, kind perfect. Well, usually this is more about the mother, because attachment is formed specifically between the mother and the child from birth to 3 years old. This is the foundation of attachment, when the type of attachment itself is formed. If a mother hasn't read a single book about child rearing or developmental psychology, if the mother herself is traumatized, if she hasn't had the experience of healthy relationships with her own parents, then such a mother will cause trauma to her child, and that child will later grow up to be codependent. That's the least that can happen. At worst, this can lead to borderline or narcissistic disorders. In other words, immature parents are very dangerous for the health of a child, for a person. So when a narcissistic partner appears in your life, whether it's a woman or a man, you fall into a certain illusion, the illusion that you are in paradise and that everything will continue this way. But a narcissistic person cannot guarantee you stability, because a narcissist is always something similar to bipolar disorder. It's an emotional swing, an emotional shaker. You will be tossed from one extreme to another in your feelings. Love and hate, that's everything characteristic of a narcissistic person and their partner. Love and hate, that's how you could describe any relationship between a victim and a narcissist. And as I already mentioned, at the beginning of the relationship, the narcissist or female narcissist creates the illusion that you are in paradise. But then a very toxic scenario starts to unfold, and you see that paradise turns into hell. And this illusion that he or she will return to the initial first stage, when everything was so sweet, there was so much romance, there was a sugar show. This illusion that everything can still go back to the initial stage of the romantic relationship actually destroys the victim both psychologically and physically. Because we all know that stress and constant anxiety gradually lead to a person's health deteriorating. So let go of the illusion that everything will go back to the way it was, that everything can be restored, and that it all depends on you, that you need to do something special for the narcissistic person so that they return to their original state of romance, love, fusion, and the imitation of being that perfect maternal or paternal figure with whom lifelong unity is possible. No, that will never happen again. Once a narcissistic person has shown you the dark side, that's the beginning of the roller coaster. It will always be like this. You will be swinging back and forth for years on this seesaw and losing your resources, both mental and physical. So it is time to let go of the illusion that you can truly bring this relationship back to the stage of sweet romantic bliss and genuine connection. Therefore, to break free from the narcissist's grip, the first thing you need to do is let go of illusions and stay grounded in reality. Second, you need to develop your own independence. If you can't immediately leave after realizing that this person has narcissistic disorder, if you don't have certain resources, the resources to leave this person, that happens, and that's okay. For a codependent person, this is more of a standard scenario than something unusual. That's why I advise such people to give themselves time to distance themselves from this person, and to give themselves time to build up their resources, including financial ones. Because it often happens that the victim of a narcissist ends up financially dependent on their partner. That's why you need to look for opportunities to earn money and support yourself independently. Don't be afraid, even if you have millions, billions, maybe some financial perks or household conveniences. All of that is the price you pay for your health and for shortening your life. Don't be afraid to live on a smaller amount. Don't be afraid that you'll starve to death. No, you won't. Look for a job where you can fully and completely provide for all your needs. And maybe you'll need to find a new profession, complete a second higher education, or take some courses that will give you opportunities for online work. So look for these opportunities. Set a goal to find a way to earn money independently so that you no longer have to depend on anyone else. Essentially, what I'm suggesting is to give up the role of being the daughter or son to your narcissistic partner. And if you can't leave them immediately, as soon as you realize that this person is taking away your time and your health, then give yourself some time. And here, you can even make use of their resources. For example, to get yourself a new education, to save up some financial resources so that you can leave them later. Their resources can also include their connections, their acquaintances, their friends. Enlist their support as well. Build relationships with them, because narcissists are very afraid of shame. If the friends find out something, well, that's a devastating blow for them, shame. That's why you should befriend most of their friends whom they consider valuable to themselves. Also, maybe you can somehow use their connections, acquaintances, or some of their resources in order to later break away from them. I don't see anything wrong with that, because the narcissist also uses your resources. And basically, this person is geared toward mutual exploitation. As narcissists say, they're basically not against being used, but the price for that use is very high. So do it consciously and only as much as is possible in your situation. But the most important thing you need to do is work through your codependency. In any more or less adequate psychological literature, you can find information that codependency is not something you can work through on your own. Without the intervention of a psychotherapist, it's practically impossible to work through this. I don't know of any such cases, so I'm telling you, this needs to be worked through with a psychotherapist. For this, read the book by the Einshells, Freedom from Codependency, where they talk about this. Let's move on. What should you do to break free from the clutches of a narcissist? Try to maintain boundaries with a narcissistic person. To do this, you need to learn to say words like no and stop without fear or guilt. There is also another issue. Very often people with borderline personality disorder end up in relationships with narcissists. These are reactive people who can respond very emotionally to certain triggers. You need to keep track of all this and try not to get drawn too quickly into arguments or conflicts that your narcissist provokes you into. And to do this, you need to develop the skills to observe yourself and your feelings. It's not easy, but you have the opportunity to develop these skills together with me in group therapy. Let the fear motivate you that after the first narcissist, there could be a second, the third, and you could end up going through your whole life with them. You also need to work on your fear of loneliness and helplessness, which are also part of that same codependency and immaturity. This is a feeling typical of children when they are still unable to exist without their parents. But we are already adults, and yet we suddenly feel helpless and powerless in this adult life. We all understand that this is a consequence of our childhood traumas. That's why work and more work is needed, so that such situations no longer repeat in your life, so that you can, at the very first signs that the person might be toxic, block their toxicity, set boundaries, cut such people off, and essentially learn to live in a society where there are a lot of narcissistic people. We're talking about the fact that a personality disorder is, well, a very deep trauma for a person. But there are many people who don't have narcissistic personality disorder yet behave like narcissists, that is, they devalue and criticize others. It's quite possible that these people have some initial level of empathy. Just like, for example, it happens in people with borderline personality disorder. But, well, we live in such a narcissistic world where practically 90% of people communicate in this way, giving advice, lecturing, criticizing, acting superior. We live in a world of low self-esteem, where almost everyone has some trauma related to self-worth. Why is that? And here we come back again to the careless attitude of parents toward their children. And by careless attitude, I simply mean parental ignorance. Everyone is familiar with the overused phrase that all comes from our childhood. In other words, all our misfortunes stem from the fact that we don't realize our childhood traumas. If you are still in a relationship with a narcissistic partner, start working on your own separation from your parents right now. I mean psychological separation. This is completely different from geographical separation. You may live very far away and earn a good living, but psychologically you may still not be separated from your parents. What does it mean to be separated? It means being able to say no and stop to your parents without feeling guilty or afraid of losing emotional contact with them. Choose which of their requests you will say yes to and do something for them with pleasure, and which requests you need to refuse without feeling guilty. I want to emphasize this once again. When you avoid feeling guilty in your relationship with your parents, it means that the process of separation has either not started for you or it is not yet complete. Therefore, the profound lack of psychological separation often leads to us repeatedly encountering narcissistic partners in our lives, individuals who, at the very beginning of the relationship, skillfully offer us the idealized images of wonderful, nurturing fathers and mothers. And we are very, very tempted by such an offer. So start working on psychological separation from your own parents. When you are truly ready to leave your narcissistic partner, I strongly suggest an ecological breakup, a method that prioritizes minimal conflict. This means that in a very thoughtful and considerate manner, you can sit down, arrange a final farewell dinner or a pleasant lunch with them, and then have a truly honest and open conversation. You can thank them for whatever it is you can genuinely thank them for. I believe that you can say thank you to anyone and also talk through everything that makes it impossible for you to continue living together. You know, when I was in the process of leaving my narcissistic partner, I said, well, I thoughtfully invited him to a very important conversation at a quiet restaurant and honestly told him that I truly love him very much. I genuinely care about him a great deal. But there are certain fundamental things that regrettably make it absolutely impossible for us to continue living together. I have a lot of gratitude to you for this, and this. But there is a part for which I can thank you. I have certain resentments towards you, and anger, and rage. And that's all normal too. But I see we've reached the dead end, a blind alley, and we can't move forward. We are holding each other's growth back, so we need to move on together. And I hope that you'll remain a good friend to me for life. And that's exactly what happened. That's exactly what happened. For more than 20 years now, I have maintained friendly, amicable, and good relations with my ex-husband, who unfortunately was a narcissistic person. But being friends with such people can actually be quite pleasant. So if possible, move to another level, to a different quality of relationship. Try to do this. Especially, it's important to do if you have children together. At the very least, you can do it for the sake of the children. Well, if your partner is very aggressive, very toxic, maybe even a psychopath, because a narcissistic partner usually doesn't resort to physical actions, to physical violence, or threaten to take your life. But there are also partners who resort to manipulation, blackmail, and threats. If you find yourself in a relationship with a psychopath, you need not only psychological counseling, but also legal advice from lawyers or attorneys. Keep records that could later help you take legal action against such a person. If he threatens you, yells at you, or frightens you and your child, you may need to consider calling the police for assistance and protection. In other words, enlist the support of attorneys, lawyers, psychologists, and psychiatrists. All of this can help you leave such a toxic person safely and without violence. But here we're specifically talking about a psychopath. Here I am focusing on relationships with people who have narcissistic personality disorder. They are usually cowardly and afraid of those who are stronger than them. and the law can be stronger than them. So appeal to the idea of interacting with such people within the legal framework. If you are afraid, for example, to pack your suitcase and your things and move to another place, then do it in the presence of witnesses. In the presence of witnesses, a narcissist usually behaves completely differently because it is important to them what people will say, what people will think. He still has this toxic shame which helps the victim influence him. Or if you genuinely do not have close friends who could readily help you with the physical act of moving, your parents can also officially serve as witnesses. If you have even once found yourself in a relationship with a narcissistic person, it means you could end up in such a relationship again and again if you don't work on yourself. And also don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and give this video a like. This is very important for the growth of my channel. And it's a small way for you to show your appreciation for my work for you. And write comments that are longer than 7 words, because YouTube doesn't count short comments. I would be very grateful for any activity from you